process of joining. Malaysia, Thailand and Turkey are also seeking to join the bloc. It now makes up more than a quarter of the global economy and consists of nearly half of the world's population. Compare that to the G7 group of advanced economies. They make up 44% of the world economy, just 10% of its people. The bloc has made financial cooperation a major priority. Their new development bank has funded almost $33 billion in loans since 2015. And trade between member states has surged more than 50% since 2017. Member states are exploring ways to move away from the US dollar and trade more in local currencies. Well, joining us now from Johannesburg is Gustavo de Carvalho. He's a senior researcher at the South African Institute of International Affairs. A very warm welcome to Counting the Cost. Let me start by addressing that all-important summit in Kazan in Russia, the 16th BRICS summit. And the optics were rather interesting. Vladimir Putin at the heart of it all. It seems to suggest that he isn't as isolated globally as perhaps many Western powers hoped he would be.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for the invitation. And I think for Russia, to a large degree, they're hosting the BRICS summit in 2024 provided them this space to showcase that they're not as isolated, that they're still able to engage with a number of countries in the world. And it is something that's fairly normal for countries to do. I think for other countries that are members of BRICS or are joining through the different initiatives that are occurring this week in Kazan, for them is a much more important space for them to find better ways in which they can engage within this fragmented global order and reduce many of the frictions that are becoming more and more common, whether it's in terms of their ability to trade or whether it's in terms of their own ability to present a coordinated voice in international institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, and increasingly so with the UN Security Council as well, with an interesting message regarding Security Council reform.
This was, of course, the first summit since the expansion of the BRICS organization. I wonder or not whether you think it's likely to sow division or it'll strengthen the organization, having so many new countries clamoring at the door to become members.
Very important question, and I think the summit this year really helped us to get a better understanding how the new members are adjusting and adapting to this fairly informal group of countries that is BRICS. To a certain degree, I think it all comes back to one of the core mechanisms that BRICS countries use to make decisions, that is true consensus. Historically, we've already seen with the original 5 BRICS members that this idea that they have to agree to disagree at all times is an important space for them to prioritize and identify what is really important for them. So to a certain degree, I think with the addition of new countries really forces BRICS to find those minimum common denominators, which on the one hand, it makes them to become a bit less revolutionary in terms of the decisions that they make. But on the other side, it allows really for countries that have different economies, limited complementarity, and often bitter rivals between themselves to find those areas in which they would like to engage and to have BRICS as a voice for them to really support their common objectives. And to a certain degree, what it means is that when there is severe disagreements between BRICS members, they either will take that issue completely out of the agenda or dilute it in a way that provides those diversity of voices to actually be presented as a common position.
Given that BRICS countries account for almost half the world's population, I wonder if the organization increasingly sees itself as a rival to the likes of the G7 or sees it instead as perhaps working in parallel.
I would say if we look into the Kazan Declaration that was announced yesterday, if we look into the language that was utilized, it's a language that talks about the complementarity between different forums. So we see very early in the declaration BRICS countries talking about the centrality of the role of the G20. What I do believe is that increasingly we're going to start looking into this triangulation of views between G20 at the center, where a number of BRICS countries are also G20 members, BRICS on the one side and the G7 at the other. And I think there is an opportunity in terms of global governance in the future. We need to acknowledge that these 3 groups, as informal and as diverse as they are, they play a major role in terms of managing of international economic and financial governance, in terms of voices of different sets of countries. And that dialogue between those three, apart from the fact that it's very difficult to do on a day-to-day basis, but it doesn't make it less important. We need to see them less as rival, but as complementary groupings that are looking for very similar decisions to be made, but from different perspectives.
And tell us about the BRICS deepening financial cooperation, because as I mentioned in the introduction, there seems to be an ambition, at least, to perhaps topple the dollar's global supremacy in international markets. Is that the underlying aim, or is it about strengthening economic ties within the group itself, or both?
I think there is often this misconception that when BRICS countries are talking about trading in local currencies, that they are necessarily talking about a process of de-dollarization. To a certain degree, there is a confluence of issues that are important for BRICS members at this moment that makes international trade very risky. And to a certain degree, many of those aspects is to a certain degree to increase the financial transactions between BRICS members. BRICS is not a trade bloc, but increasingly looks into trade infrastructure. So when we look into the decisions that were made this year, whether it's in terms of the BRICS cross-border payment system that had already been requested in the Johannesburg Summit of 2023, the cross-border settlement discussions that will be ongoing, the issues of reinsurance. Basically, what we're seeing here is to provide BRICS members an ability to better trade with one another, and not necessarily to replace the US dollar in all of their transactions, but that to a certain degree provides cheaper, faster, and more reliable payments or systems in some specific trading situations, and particularly when BRICS countries are trading with one another. And of course, that is very much linked to global South countries like South Africa or Brazil that see themselves right in the middle of this global geopolitical dispute. For them, they would like to have more options. For countries that have been affected by sanctions and the inability, like in the case of Russia, to trade via SWIFT, this is not an alternative for them. This is the only option or the main option that they're looking into at the moment. And I'm saying this because it's important to also notice that different BRICS members look into those discussions at different levels with different objectives. And that tends to temper to a large degree how much and how fast BRICS is able to make some of those decisions.
Okay, Gustavo de Carvalho, Senior Researcher at the South African Institute of International Affairs. Thanks for joining us and Counting the Cost. A fascinating discussion. Real estate once accounted for more than a quarter of China's economic activity. The sector has spiraled since 2021 when regulators cracked down on firms that had taken on high levels of debt. Tens of millions of housing units are now vacant, either because they're unfinished or unsold. The market collapse has taken a bite out of the wealth and confidence of Chinese households.